Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about developing Pillars of Eternity. This has been a very well requested video, but one I put off on doing because, like South Park, I was not involved in Pillars in any lead role, and my notes on it are brief. I don't have a lot of deep notes on Pillars. Luckily, this wasn't that long ago, so I can remember a lot of stuff. But it's not like Fallout or any of the Troika games, or especially WildStar Carbine, where I have extensive notes on the development. But I think I can answer a lot of questions and tell you some fun stories about it. So let's go. So I was on South Park since October of 2011 when I joined with Obsidian. Before the Kickstarter for Pillars the next year in September of 2012, I was asked to be involved. Josh and Fergus came to talk to me. We talked about some designs I could do. Did some videos before the Kickstarter even went live because there are stretch goals and updates that have to be done. The Kickstarter, though, turned out to be huge. If you remember, we asked for $1 million and we made that on day one. And since the Kickstarter ran for a month, by the end of the month we had 4 million, I think a little more than 4 million. There was a lot. So I got involved in design stuff. I also, because the monetary value kept going up, we realized we desperately needed more stretch goals, and that's how the recipes came into being. I forget. I think it was Josh who came and asked me about them, and I think my response was, "Wow, I haven't put recipes in games since Temple in 2003," and he thought I was saying no, I wouldn't do it, and I'm like, "No, what I mean is I have a ton of recipes," and I ended up writing those. I just collected them from my recipe collection. Josh was the one who rewrote them into lore of the game. But what was interesting about Kickstarter is that meant, since it was crowdsourced, all the features were defined before we were funded. There wasn't a lot of wiggle room for things you do with a publisher, like, these things are going to be determined, these things are TBD. We didn't have that luxury. Also, the money comes from Kickstarter and it's fixed. There's no going back to the well. We had $4 million to spend and not a dime more, which meant things had to be very carefully monitored and tracked. I remember watching the countdown with a lot of other people at Obsidian on the final day. There's a video floating around. You can watch us sitting around one of our lounges watching the Kickstarter on big screen TV. That was really cool. And while I was still working on South Park doing programming, as soon as Kickstarter was done, I started in on the designs. And the designs got done in a first pass for the Kickstarter because we had to describe them. But I actually had to nose to the grindstone write all these things down. Just to be clear, I did two of the classes, the monk and the cipher. I did the crafting system and the stronghold. Now all these designs went through Josh and there were modifications made, and I'll talk about that, and I'll even talk about a couple ideas I had that didn't make it in. So the Cypher class was very much inspired by the Esper class that I helped make for WildStar. That shipped, so you can go take a look if you want. Well, actually, WildStar can't be played anymore, but you can look it up. The Esper and the Cypher share a lot of similarities. The Monk was an interesting one because I wanted to do a class that was powered by the damage they took. So the more damage they took, the more abilities they could use. The wound system encapsulates that really well because first of all, it explains why monks don't wear armor. They want to be hit. They want to take that damage. It converts into a wound, so even if they get healed, they still have that wound that they can spend. I really like that. I like when system mechanics explain why a class is the way it is. So I also did the crafting system. The crafting system was pretty straightforward. There were different stations you went to for the different items you would craft. You'd collect the ingredients, craft it, pretty straightforward. The Stronghold was originally far less abstract than what shipped. The Stronghold was originally designed with all these extra things you could build onto it that gave you passive or active bonuses. Your companions that were assigned to the Stronghold would literally go off on quests, and I think you ran them. You ran them through quests, through procedurally generated dungeons, and that's important because I'll talk about procedurally generated again soon. You can see I've been thinking procedurally generated content for decades. So you'd run your companions through these procedurally generated dungeons to complete Stronghold quests. And all this went back into the Stronghold system that made your Stronghold bigger and better. There was no time to do this. Like I said, our money was fixed. Once you did a Kickstarter, that was how much money you had. So Josh made a lot of those systems a lot more abstract. There was a related system that I was hoping we could do called the Adventurers Guild. The Adventurers Guild was the design of something that was going to be in one of the towns that you could go to get companions. But they just didn't have a bunch of companions sitting around for you to take. The way it worked was you made your own companion, you went through character creation, made a companion, and then you'd run that companion through a variety of procedurally generated dungeons. I like this because it not only let the player experiment with different class and race combinations, but it also let them make a companion that was specifically something they wanted to pair with their main player character. Of course, we didn't have time to do procedurally generated dungeons, and it all got swept aside and didn't get done, which I understand. What I love, though, was someone called my idea, it's like Build-A-Bear, but with bloodshed. I love that description. The other ideas I had, I thought the idea of the player being a watcher needed more systemic support. So I wanted special abilities for the watcher, and I also wanted system mechanics that we shipped with to go through a watcher flavored design. I'll give you an example. The watcher was supposed to constantly be seeing and talking to spirits. So rather than just have the find trap skill where you click on it and it highlights traps that are around you, I wanted instead a spirit would show up and walk down the hallway and set off a ghost version of the trap. So the spirit would be done in a ghost pixel shader, and the trap would execute as a ghost pixel shader, and then they both fade out. Now you know there's a trap in the hallway. And you did it by having a spirit show you. You did it through your watcher ability. Similarly, with finding a secret door, rather than just have it highlight the secret door, you actually see a ghost walk over, pull the book, pull the lever, whatever activated, and a ghost secret door would open. The ghost would walk through the ghost secret door, it would shut, boom, there. Your watcher abilities just let you find a secret door. Again, we didn't have time to do this, so that got cut. I understand it. I kind of miss it. I love when system mechanics, again, I've said this, when system mechanics support an ability. And just so you know, I had a rule with Josh. Josh was the lead designer. I was doing side design. I had a rule that I'd only bring up a design idea once, and then I wouldn't bring it up again. I only broke that rule once on the entire development of Pillars, and that was for that watcher system. I brought it up again. I said, hey, I really think we should do this. It's so cool, and it will just remind the player to reiterate and underscore you're a watcher. Even your most basic things that you've seen in every other RPG is a watcher-flavored ability in this one. But we just didn't have time to do it. So when the Kickstarter made it, I was immediately moved from South Park over to Pillars of Eternity to begin coding. However, and that was in September of 2012, South Park wasn't done. And it wasn't going to be done for another year and a half. A few months later, in mid-2013, I was moved from Pillars back to South Park because South Park really needed a lot of bug fixing, needed a lot of optimization. I worked on that for about 8-9 months. In March of 2014, I finally went back to Pillars. And so I was on that for the final year. I coded combat and basically everything you could think of that was associated with combat. The class abilities, spells, any items, creature attacks, creature abilities. All of these internally were called spells, and I just made a spell system. A spell was anything that had an effect on the world, whether it was damage, whether it applied a status effect, whether it changed the state of the world. It was all done through a spell because there was a spell system that managed beginning the spell, maintaining it, and then turning it off and cleaning up all of its effects in the world. That's why status effects also went through the spell system, because status effects are things that get applied to a creature, including the player, and make alterations to them and then eventually come off and have to be undone. So all that went through a giant switch statement of status effects and spells. I'd heard at one point that Baldur's Gate had a huge switch statement devoted to their spells. So did Pillars of Eternity. That thing was enormous. I wanted to break it up, but it didn't make it any clearer to break it up into multiple switch statements and different functions, because there was no good breakdown of spells and status effects. It was just, here's a list of status effects we support, execute them. I also did crafting. So I did a limited amount of UI. We had a UI programmer who did more UI work than I did. And the crafting system was primarily UI. So he took care of that after the design was done. And then right at the end of Pillars, there was a big crunch to get it out. It went out in March of 2015. Got great reviews. And I immediately switched over to Tyranny. So there wasn't even a lot of breathing space. It was interesting because I moved on to Pillars from South Park immediately, and then moved back, and then moved back again. And then as the moment Pillars went out, boom, I was on Tyranny. So that entire period of time from 2011 to 2016 when Tyranny shipped was just a blur of coding and some design. But I hope this gives you an idea of Pillars of Eternity development from my point of view, and what it was like to be primarily a programmer doing a little bit of design on the side.